Well, happy Tuesday. Wanted to talk a little bit about some extra things we've been talking about in relation to the Nicene Creed, which is all focused on the Trinity. And I hope as we've been going through this that you're starting to appreciate just how wide and how deep you can go in our study of the Trinity. Just a brief reminder, I've talked about some of these books in other places, but wanted to walk through the primary texts that I've been using as I've been studying each week for this. Kevin DeYoung's The Nicene Creed, nice and short summation of it. Good to just get an overview of what the Nicene Creed is talking about. I actually recommend this one if you want to dig into the Holy Spirit more by Greg Allison. God, Gift, and Guide to Knowing the Holy Spirit. Nice, succinct summary of his bigger book. This one, The Holy Spirit. That's what it's called, the Holy Spirit. So that one's much more dense and walks through, like I've talked about the like exegesis, biblical theology, historical theology, systematic theology before, and that's what that book works to do. Is it has different sections working through each one of those things. Delighting in the Trinity by Michael Reeves has been phenomenal. Just how we as Christians are brought into this intra-Trinitarian relationship of love, spending time with each other. I've got a couple others that I don't have here right now. They're probably at home because I've been with summer schedule. Things are all over the place, but The Story of Creeds and Confessions by one of my old professors from seminary, Donald Fairbairn and Ryan Reeves. Really helpful, giving, again, an overview of some of the historical context that was leading up to some of the discussions, debates that were taking place in the early church. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago and only had one person email me about it, so I figured I may as well talk about it because I did the research and conversation on it. What is the distinction between person and being when we're talking about the Trinity? So this professor, Donald Fairbairn, I keep running into him at like various conferences that I go to, so it's been kind of fun being able to keep up with some of my professors that I greatly benefited from when I was in seminary. But I just emailed him about how do we come to this distinction of we refer to the three as persons and the one as being, or like the ousia and the hypostasis. So I'm just going to read his reply in the email that I thought was helpful. He said, "The issue was that God has always had a Son and a Spirit with whom he is in eternal relationship. Thus, persons and personal relationships are fundamental to what it means to be God. Athanasius famously said that it is more pious to describe God in relation to his Son and call him Father than describe him in relation to us and call him Creator. In other words, he is Father before and more fundamentally than he is Creator." When you hear pious, don't think like holiness or specialness. Think of it more, it's more proper, is what Athanasius is saying. Going on from Dr. Fairbairn, "And because the divine persons and divine personal relationships are eternal, the divine persons and divine personal relationships are the archetype for our human relationships. To say it differently, we are created as persons to share in personal relationship with God and with each other as a way of imaging the divine persons." That's we are images, or created as images of God. So back to the original question. Why did the church use the word persons to describe the threeness of God? In my opinion, is because they were not primarily trying to describe the threeness of God. The point was not just some kind of threeness. Instead, they were trying to describe the Father in relation to his Son and his Spirit. And they recognize that those relationships are personal. Therefore, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are persons. So that's where the name persons came from. And even like predating that, if you're thinking of the Nicene Creed, they didn't actually use the term persons because we get the word persons from Latin. So as language progresses, you go from Greek being the primary language used to discuss theology, then it becomes Latin. Now there's if you want to read, I enjoy John Calvin. If you want to read John Calvin, you have to know French in order to actually get to some of the words he's saying. If you want to read Bonhoeffer, be another more recent example, you have to know some German in order to be able to read and translate what they're saying. It's somewhat difficult to try to always figure out what these people are saying, which is why I'm grateful for people like Dr. Fairbairn, who can dumb it down to my level, and then I can explain it to us as a church. There's, again, always more on these that you could dig into. If you're wanting to learn more, feel free to send me an email. I can share some of these books and these resources with you. This past Sunday, we talked about the Holy Spirit and wanted to just touch on a little bit that I, again, didn't have time to dig into on Sunday. And some of my hesitation in talking about the Holy Spirit is every person I talk to has interacted or engaged with some of the excesses that we have. For example, IHOP, not the delicious pancakes, the Kansas City-based International House of Prayer, started doing like outreach opportunities to my college when I was there. And it really drove me nuts because like they would claim to be holding the Holy Spirit in their hands and then pass them to the next person and go around the circle. And they did this on Thursday nights. And part of my frustration is the people that were most active in these Holy Spirit experiences were the ones that were getting drunk on Fridays, sleeping around, not having any issues in terms of personal holiness and like piety. So just a caveat when we're thinking about the Holy Spirit. One, if it's not helping you focus more on Jesus, then it's false. The second, if it's not driving you back to the Bible as its foundation, as what it's building us back to, then it's false. Third, if it's not growing you in holiness or growing you in demonstrating and modeling the fruit of the Spirit, then it's false. Jonathan Edwards, in the First Great Awakening, wrote significantly about what is a true marker of the Spirit versus a false marker of the Spirit in his religious affections. And part of the excesses is for a season, I was really digging into this issue, reading quite a bit about it. I actually toyed with cessationist. If you don't know the term, cessationist is someone that believes that the more sign gifts, so speaking in tongues, miracles, those kinds of things, stopped with the close of the canon. And mostly due to reading a couple different books. So one of them is by Tom Schreiner, just titled Spiritual Gifts, What They Are and Why They Matter. He is a cessationist, but if I were ever going to be a cessationist, it would be a cessationist in the same model as Tom Schreiner. And so he talks, and these two books came out at the same time. The other one is Practicing the Power by Sam Storms, Welcoming the Gifts of the Holy Spirit in Your Life. And then, I forgot to grab it, but another guy, Andrew Wilson, did another book at about the same time where he argued for charismatic, EU, referring to initially to the Eucharist. And so the Lord's Supper is what grounds us, but then we are charismatic in our expressions of the Spirit. So charismatic would be more open to, or continuationist, open to the miraculous sign gifts of the Holy Spirit continuing today. And so I toyed with this sensationism for a bit because of Tom Schreiner, but I couldn't get around two specific passages. The first is 1 Corinthians 12:31. Paul says, but desire the greater gifts, which means that there are levels of significance or priority to various gifts in the New Testament. And then he goes on, I will show you an even better way, which is the love chapter of 1 Corinthians 13. And so just mulling that passage over, I was processing, do I desire these greater gifts? The second one is in 1 Thessalonians 5. And I heard, so Sam Storms did this book. I heard him give a talk on don't stifle or quench the Spirit in 1 Thessalonians 5 at it used to be called Desiring God Conference. I don't know what it's called anymore, but Piper's Pastors Conference, quoting that one, and just that reminder that we need to be open to what the Holy Spirit is doing. So 1 Thessalonians 5 says, don't stifle the Spirit, don't despise prophecies, but test all things. Hold on to what is good and stay away from every kind of evil. So are we looking to stifle or quench or push down the Holy Spirit in our lives? And I don't want to be guilty of doing that, which has led me to being in the continuationist camp. I wouldn't say I'm charismatic, but open to what the Spirit does. Okay, that's the Spirit. A week ago, we talked about the Son. So there was a debate that took place from about 2015, 16 to 2019, 2020, still going on in some circles, but has really died down. And that is related to a few acronyms, EFS, ESS, and ERAS. So begin as EFS, which is an acronym for the Eternal Functional Subordination. And that is referring to Jesus being subordinate to the Father. As the conversation went on, it became clarified. And so even those who originally held to EFS have shifted their title to referring to what they call ERAS, Eternal Relations of Authority and Submission. ESS is Eternal Subordination of the Son. So what's interesting is the biggest proponents of it are two people, Wayne Grudem and Bruce Ware. And Grudem has argued for it for decades, but he has clarified and refined the way he talks about it, especially in his new systematic theology, but he still holds to some level of eternal functional subordination. But actually, because of this argument, I don't recommend Grudem's systematic theology anymore as the primary textbook that people should be reading. If you want to get a good systematic theology, a couple I would recommend. One is The Wonderful Works of God by Herman Bavinck. Bavinck just had an unbelievable educational experience writing in the Netherlands at the turn of the century, incredibly influential just across the world. But one that is still being written is Systematic Theology by Stephen Wellum. It was originally going to be 2 volumes. It has now been expanded into 3 volumes, and only the first one is out. So that one is still coming out, but Steve is a good friend of my dad's, so I've gotten to spend a decent amount of time with Steve, and his book would be as close as I can get in finding someone that would agree with where I am theologically. He's Baptistic. He actually does PhD at TEDS, the EFCA seminary. He's spoken at a number of EFCA events. I don't think This is, I think I can say it publicly. I think he's a member at an EFCA church in Louisville. At least he was last time I talked to him just a few years ago. So highly, highly recommend Steve Wellum's Systematic Theology if you're going to want to get one. But the question or the debate comes down to, is subordination, so we talked about this on Sunday, ad intra, a part of the intrinsic nature or the immanent Trinity? Is it a part of the very being of God to be subordinationist? Now, a couple passages that those who are in support of EFS would appeal to would be John 6:38 and 1 Corinthians 15:28. So John 6:38 says, "For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." The question is, does that refer to the pre-incarnate Christ? Or is that referring to Jesus in his incarnation to do his Father's will? Similarly, 1 Corinthians 15:28 says, when everything is subject to Christ, then the Son himself will also be subject to the one who subjected everything to him, so that God may be all in all. Exact same question. It's saying the Son himself will also be subject to the one. Is that referring to the pre-incarnate Christ in that it is ad intra, in part of the immanent Trinity, or is it the external outworkings of the Trinity? And the issue boils down to, if there is one God, then can there be two different wills within the Godhead? Because submission means that one person's will is dominating or overpowering the other will. And so I would say no. Now, what's interesting about this is in eternity future, Jesus has lowered himself by adding humanity onto his divinity, and that will never be separated. So that's where we talk about he's one person in two natures. But his divine nature cannot be something different than his Father, such that he would have a different or competing will to the will of the Father. That's the short summary of 5 years of debate and discussion. When I was in seminary, actually, this was just getting going. So I had friends who were not allowed to quote Wayne Grudem in papers because some people actually called him a heretic. Now, I think that's a step too far, but I do have concerns with the way that he is viewing and approaching the Trinity proper. And part of the issue is just knowing some of the history of what has taken place. And again, Bruce Ware, Wayne Grudem were the two people that were most staunchly arguing for this. What they would do is they would take this idea that Jesus, within the Trinitarian nature itself, Jesus is subordinate to the Father, and use that, map that on to gender relationships in the church. Now, I've shared this numerous times throughout this series so far. We can't make that analogy. So anything that is true of us isn't necessarily true of God. We can only do the reverse. What's true of God, we are created in his image. So we will have a reflection, although it will be, like as Paul says, it'll be in a mirror dimly. So it will not be a perfect reflection of that. Complementarianism wasn't really a thing at the time. So it's been interesting for me hearing, reading, studying the whole complementarian conversation from Grudem's perspective. Because when in the late 80s, when it's called CBMW, Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, was just getting started, egalitarianism was the law of the land. So when they released their book in, I think it was 89, the first edition of their book came out, they started getting emails saying, "Oh, people still believe this? I thought no one actually held to what the Bible teaches anymore." I've talked about complementarianism in other forms or settings as well, preached on it a couple times, so you can go look at those kinds of things, or email me if you want more information about that. But what I think they were doing is they were appealing to the Trinity as an argument for their complementarianism, and I think that was a misstep. Like, we don't need the complementarianism to be within the Trinity for it to be true. So I think there was just some misunderstanding, and historically it makes sense. Like, they were looking for reasons to bolster their position in the competing environment of academia, where egalitarianism was the law of the land. So it makes sense. I just think it was a category mistake where they weren't understanding what's now called classical Trinitarianism or classical theism. So that's a lot. Sorry. There are all sorts of podcasts and articles and blogs and even books on this topic. I just want to give you a little teaser about it and encourage you to be careful of the systematic theologies that you're listening to. So looking forward, we have one more week where we will look at one holy Catholic and apostolic church, and then we'll begin our Summer in the Psalms series, which will take us up through August 9th. And then this fall, we're going to be studying the book of Acts. One of the things I've been wanting to encourage us as a church to be thinking and praying about, considering over this year, is what does it look like for us to be faithful witnesses? So we're going to study Acts all fall. That will get us up to Christmas this past year. And then just a reminder, as we're entering into summer, remember to check the news flash each week, as summer events are kicking off here soon, and office hours are going to be sporadic throughout the summer. So things like the women's book study and discipleship event is going on. We have a men's book study going through this one that I talked about on Sunday. You can register for that. There's a men's grilling event event coming up soon. There are monthly youth events. The second Sunday summer socials are kicking off. And we have a members meeting on June 14th. So make sure that you're checking your email. Make sure you're checking the Friday news flash to keep up to date with what is going on here. And again, if you have any questions about any of this stuff, you want to dig into it further, I would love to sit down for a cup of coffee and talk to you about it, or let you borrow one of the books, or send you one of the blogs or podcasts, those kinds of things, if you want to dig into this further. Praying the Lord blesses you this week. I look forward to our sermon on the church on Sunday. Hope to see you there.